Okay, well, let's get started then. Hi, and welcome to everyone. Welcome to our session, Reimagining OERs in Humanities Courses, Best Practices for Literature, Mythology, Art History, and more. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very excited to be a part of this year's Open Education Conference. Before I introduce our panel, I'd like to take a moment to thank the Colorado Department of Higher Education for its OER grant program and Governor Polis's Zero Textbook Cost Challenge. I'd also like to thank the OER initiatives at our institutions, the Community College of Denver and Arapahoe Community College, because these programs have made this work that we're doing possible. So today for this very short presentation, the four of us will be sharing some of the challenges and successes that we've had with OER in our arts and humanities courses. My name is Susan Staffenbill, and I am a member of the English faculty at Arapahoe Community College in Littleton, Colorado. With me today, I'm honored to have these three amazing individuals. Karen Danielson is the program chair and associate professor of visual arts and graphic design at the Community College of Denver. Mitch Cota is a reference librarian focusing on OER at Arapahoe Community College. And Monica Fuglai is the chair of the English department at Arapahoe Community College. So in this session, I'm going to introduce this backwards. Mitch and Monica will be talking about their work creating literature courses that are zero textbook cost, ZTC, by using OER and some very creative workarounds. Karen will talk about her work with OER for art history and art appreciation. And I will talk about my quest for a world mythology OER. I'm going to go ahead and get us started, and then I'll turn things over to Karen, and then we'll close with Mitch and Monica working or sharing their materials. So, oops, you know what? I forgot to advance the slide. Can everyone see that? Everyone good? Okay. So
yeah, we can see it.
Awesome. Okay, I'll try to remember to do that. So I just briefly have a few things to share about my experiences trying to figure out a way to use OER in my world mythology course. I had been using, excuse me, sorry about the paper. I'd been using some form of OER in my composition classes for a couple of years. And when I decided to switch my world mythology course over to OER, I was really surprised that there just weren't any. There weren't any already made OERs or texts or anything for this class. I found a lot of classical Greek and Roman typical stuff, but nothing really for world mythology. So this seemed really odd to me because in teaching world mythology, pretty much every text that I teach is in the public domain. So it's all there, it's free, it's available. No one has just put it together yet. So, so what I ended up doing was basically remixing material from other OERs. So I went to world literature, history, religion, and art. And from there, I was able to pull things together to create something that fit for world mythology. I also brought in texts that were on websites that were in the public domain. And then what I was able to do to supplement that was link out from our learning management system to a digital edition of a mythology textbook. And with an older edition, the digital licensing allowed almost unlimited access. I think it was unlimited access for students. So for all of that material, like, you know, the background, the introductions, the critical theory, and all of that, I was able to bring in a text. So technically, the class wasn't completely OER, but it worked out fine. It was still zero textbook cost, which was really, I think, is the goal, is what we're looking for our students. So, so you know, there's a manageable workaround, and that's really what I wanted to share. It doesn't always have to be Creative Commons licensed work. So it's not always technically OER, but as long as it was zero cost, then I was happy, and my students were happy with that as well. So I think a lot of our courses in the humanities might work this way. You know, we might need to remix from other OERs for different, from different areas. and then utilize the resources that we have through our libraries and even other online resources that aren't technically OER or technically Creative Commons, but they still work for us. So, so that's what I did. I did this for the World Mythology class, but I think that a lot of what I did could work in other classes as well. So I'm going to give way here to Karen and let her talk about what she's done in her art classes. So Karen, are you ready to share?
I sure am. Thanks so much, Susan, and thanks so much for putting this together. I feel so honored to be part of this group. Um, so I teach art history. I haven't actually taught art appreciation in many, many years, but I have led my team to working on some OER for art appreciation. But I'll probably focus on what I've done in my art history courses specifically, because it does look a little different from the resource that I believe Susan is sharing out that we've compiled for our art appreciation courses. So when I started, I'm sure probably a fairly similar narrative to many of you. When I started this, I actually didn't even know what OER was. I had no clue. What I knew was that when I was doing my assessment practices, that my students were not doing the readings. They were not actually even buying the book most of the time, right? It's a very art history, obviously very expensive book. They were maybe buying the access codes for those of us that were using those. Some of us that weren't, spent a good deal of time trying to mirror what was going on in the access code world, to not a very good pedagogical effect, and so we started saying, well, what can we do differently? And I just said, I think we can do better as a team. We can just sit down and start writing and compiling. And when we did this, we really started with our course outcomes. It's really interesting, at least, and I'm sure we all come from very different locations, but nowhere in my course outcomes does it say students need to memorize how to spell every artist's name and the exact year. I teach at a community college, so we have very few art history majors. It's mostly a it's a service course, sorry, for a lot of our other majors. And so we started really looking at those outcomes. We even had the opportunity to rewrite some of those outcomes at the state level to make them a little bit better. And then we said, well, what is the material that's best going to teach those outcomes? And it freed us to this wonderful ability to say we're only assigning material and compiling or writing our own material. That helps us teach these, to teach what we need our students to learn. And some of that really did mean that the work we used wasn't always credible. I lead with this in my art history 1 class, and I always think it's great. I give them a bunch of different interpretations of the Woman of Willendorf, and some which are just so strange. And we talk about this. We talk about how you can construct an argument and who's doing a better job of this. And without going into too many details, I think what I've heard from a lot of colleagues of mine that are teaching art history, they think nothing's as rigorous as the textbook, right? And sometimes I think that showing diversity and how people have expressed ideas is actually useful for our students to see that. So that's always been kind of something that I get a lot of odd responses to, that I am a little surprised by, that this kind of strong conviction that the textbook is better, whereas I really felt like it was this kind of one autonomous voice. It didn't show like bias, it didn't show a lot of conflicting viewpoints, things that I love teaching about. So so I thought that was really empowering, and that certainly has led us to really go on truly the polar opposite direction of most art history textbooks, where if you look at the Egypt chapter, I mean, it's like you got 2 days, you're covering all of Egypt, hold on to your hats, we're running, and that never felt really good. So now we can look at maybe 1 or 2 big things, dive in deeply, with 1 or 2 concepts, 1 or 2 eras, 1 or 2 people, whatever our focus is at that time. And we do sort of change it out. I guess I should mention that if a new thing is discovered, someone wants to write a new module, we could say, oh, this one's architecture. Maybe we want to talk about architecture. Oh, this one's about turning points. What was it that made Hatshepsut so interesting, and how is that represented in the art? So we could pick and choose some of those things. So that's been kind of fun. And it does allow us to kind of, like I said, relate to more contemporary issues, and respond to those much more quickly. And I know that sounds funny. I used to joke that I was going to wear those headsets that they wear where they're like, it's an important breaking thing, and I was going to be like, breaking news, art history. And then Notre Dame set on fire. And I thought, shoot, I really need to get one of those, so I can stay up to date. But truly, there's a lot of stuff that's happening in the world that is extremely current, and we can respond so quickly to it, by looking at, summarizing, sending them out to kind of do some of their own pulling of resources and kind of analyzing what those are. That's been a really positive experience for us. That's probably way over my time, so I apologize. I need to pass the baton to Monica.
We're all so sensitive about our time. We'll end up with hopefully a bunch of time left for questions at the end. Susan, would you advance the slide thank you. So I'm Monica Fugli, and I do not actually have a fully developed OER. What I have is really work. I have been engaged in work toward OER. Right now I'm at zero textbook cost. I've really done this through 2 different courses, and they're unique courses, which makes them challenging in terms of developing that material. So the one I'm teaching this semester is Survey of African American Lit. And the one I've taught in previous semesters is ethnic literature, which is really a focus on multicultural literature in the United States. The biggest challenges for me was that in order to, what I try to do in ethnic literature is focus on modern literature. So now I've added another stumbling block to engaging in OER. And so what it's really required of me is to revision or sort of revise some of my major assignments. And rather than have the whole class read the same text, which is really what I've always done in my lit classes, have texts assigned via major thematic elements, and so that the students can get those texts through our library. And so what I have done for both ethnic literature and African American literature is collaborate with the library. Those resources are there and available to our students, and a lot of times our students aren't actually using them. So the first time we did this with ethnic literature, we did a sort of date with a book experience where the students came in, a few descriptive words were written on a cover that was wrapped around the text, and students sort of picked one blindly, and that was their text for that 3-week period. I developed units that aligned with the library's lending periods so that we would actually meet in the library itself when they got their first book, when they got their second book, and when they got their third book. So all 3 of those units aligned with the lending period, and then the final was actually held in the library. What this did is it drove students to see the library as a major source or a major additional source to their resources. And it got students who weren't using library resources into that space to sort of demystify the process for some of them. And it also allowed us, particularly in ethnic literature, to problematize things like database search engines, library search engines, library descriptions and entries. And I'm thinking about Susan's comment about aligning, or not Susan's, Karen's comment about looking at those course outcomes, because the course outcomes really drove a lot of our collaboration with the library. Because examining some of the ways that texts were driven out of collections was actually a way to examine sort of what happens to multicultural literature if we're not deeply aware of the processes we're using in our libraries. And so it really included, in ethnic literature, it really included that interrogation of our cataloging process and some reflection on how cataloging might be echoed through those course outcomes. And one of the greatest things that happened in ethnic literature is 60% of the students in my course had never used our ACC library before. By the end of the semester, everyone had. and everyone reported their intention to use the library again. So to continuously access some of those resources. In African American Lit survey, we're doing it slightly differently. The students have the freedom to go pick those texts, but I'm really driving them to work with and collaborate with librarians like Mitch or like Courtney in the library to really figure out a text that not only fits the learning outcomes for our course, but also fits them, right? So they get an opportunity to get a feel for a book that they might want to use, and then they will turn around and supplement their learning in that text by working through those library databases. A lot of the other content I have gotten for African American Lit has really been from a wide variety of online sources. So it's not, again, it's zero textbook cost. It's not in an OER yet, but coming from all sorts of places like poetry.org, the Smithsonian. I also have used the WPA, some of the old Works Progress Association, from the National Writers Project. And a lot of those are in the Smithsonian collection. So those are great spaces for us to go into. I just saw a couple questions in the chat. So I was just checking that real briefly, but I will hand it actually over to Mitch, and we'll try to get to those questions when he is done. But I really, I cannot tell you enough how beneficial it has been for me to work in collaboration with the library. My librarians, one of the other benefits is my students now see librarians as co-creators of knowledge in our classroom. And having them consistently talk about specialists around the college has been very beneficial.
All right, let's talk about the library. So my part is just going to be kind of supplementing what they have all done, but this seems like a really easy point, which is librarians as resources. And I think that everybody would unequivocally say, yes, of course, librarians are resources. But I think that sometimes when different institution sizes can really dictate how much time and how much manpower we have in terms of librarians being able to assist you with OER. And so even here at ACC, I am a reference librarian. I'm not an OER librarian. We don't have the capacity to have someone solely dedicated to OER. But that doesn't mean that we are not here as resources. So even in smaller institutions, I would encourage people to reach out to their librarians. We love a workaround, and we will probably find a way to still get the content you need. So one of the workarounds we've used, and this might touch on some of the questions that are in the chat right now, but Shakespeare, one of our Shakespeare classes, is a great example where the professor had gone through and found the specific text she wanted to use that was free and was able to be used by the entire class, but she really wanted the introductions from that specific critical edition type text. And so what we did is fair use, and kind of piggybacking on Karen's point of covering depth over breadth. She didn't cover 20 plays, which means that we didn't need to do 20 introductions. Fair use easily allowed us to pull introductions from an anthology of her choice and still incorporate those into her classroom, into a D2L shell, which again, made sure it was secure so we don't have any copyright issues. I know the next thing that I always like to belabor is the AER versus OER for supplemental materials. The library pays a lot of money, no matter where you are. It's a lot of money to whatever institution you're at to have all these research materials available to you. So having alternative educational resources could be anything from, I've pulled research articles to align with different modules throughout a class for different classes. I've pulled periodicals that are, excuse me, that are subject-based or profession-based to support, again, different learning outcomes within the classroom. All these things free, of course, to the students, just at a cost to the library. And again, not really endorsing the fact of maybe using these as, you know, core texts, but using them to support everything that the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. Ebooks, oh my gosh, for time, okay, I'm gonna speed up. Ebooks are a pain, to say the least. So what we've done is utilize, as Monica kind of already covered, we try to buy thematically instead of, it's very rare that we're going to be able to buy a multi-user to the extent that would need to be multi-user subscription for a book that would go towards a whole classroom being able to access one book. But we can definitely buy a thematic collection of books so that multiple students can pull from a certain theme so that they're able to still interact and still participate, but not maybe with the exact same book and still get the same learning outcomes achieved. And then the last thing, I covered this a little bit in AER, but periodicals are really, really exceptional for discussion and course content when it comes to, especially right now when we're online. So daily content when we're trying to generate discussion online and things of that nature. If you pull from periodicals, like I know me and Susan just recently talked about World Literature Today, and it's something that the library pays for access to, but you can pull content from to drive those everyday discussions that happen in the classroom, especially since now most of us are some version of online. But yeah, so sorry I covered that very quickly, but we wanted to open it up for questions.
I'm wondering if we could take a minute to hit the subject of translations, because that came up in the chat. And I just wanted to say one thing we do in class is sometimes problematize a text. And so much like Karen said, they don't have to be perfect. That might be a good opportunity to address those quaint translations in some ways. Okay, sorry.
No, that's good. I wanted to add to that. Yeah, that's the one thing that I miss. I miss, like, there's a couple of really new, interesting translations of Homer right now, and it's hard. It pulls at my heart when I can't use those, but I can. I mean, I can always scan 1 or 2 pages out of that book, and then one of the things that I love to do as an exercise is have students bring in all these different translations, and then we look at them. We look at the same passage from Homer and compare and just talk about, I love the word you guys have been using, problematize and interrogate. And I love doing that with my students. So yeah, so Chapman's Homer, yep, it's pretty old. It can be pretty challenging. But again, I can mix that with like a prose translation and then bring in other options. But we definitely get creative with this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the good thing too is it sort of pushes us out of our teaching comfort zone, which I always like. I want to be challenged in that way as well. So what are some of the other questions that we've had? I just popped in a few minutes ago, so.
I think Mitch covered the critical edition question fairly well. And I'm wondering if some access to some of those translations might be available via fair use, or some of that benefit of assigning multiple texts across the class. So if your library carries multiple translations, one benefit might be having students access those multiple texts.
Yeah, Monica, I think I might steal your idea about the date with a text.
Everybody should steal that idea. Students were so positive about that experience. And on the whole, it was a class that just felt very, very good. They really liked it. So I'm a big fan of it. One thing that I didn't mention in my presentation that I often do is also send students out to find supplementary material. And so I call it show and tell. So each unit, I send them out on their own journey for that open access resource or that video or something like that that can enhance the learning that we do. Because again, we're co-creating knowledge. And so we can bring some specialty, but sometimes they can bring that additional text.
All right, it is 6:25, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but I would like to invite you to hang out for the next 15 minutes with our speakers after the recording ends.
That went by so fast.
Oh my gosh, so fast. So I want to address Leah.